Oh no. Okay, so on page 392 of your textbook, it starts talking about the managing inventory within the central service department. So a patient enters the hospital for a surgical procedure. I think we've addressed this already. The patient has concerns. They might not be thinking, oh my gosh, I hope they have all the supplies. That will be in my thoughts next time I go for surgery, because it happened to me once where the surgeon was assured they had everything they needed for the case, and the materials management person actually did not verify that they had everything they needed for the case. And it was unique because the doctor had never done any surgeries at this hospital ever, and so this was his first one. So he didn't get a good customer service experience out of that, and neither did I. The doctor was awesome, by the way. Okay. So we need to make sure that we're able to provide the things they need for surgery. Failure to provide items needed for patient care and treatment directly impacts patient safety. And therefore, inventory management in the healthcare facility is critically important. There's a lot of effort, communication, coordinating, and planning to make sure that every patient has every item needed for every procedure. It's not always 100% possible. Every. Sometimes there are acceptable substitutes. Sometimes the hospital needs to borrow from another local facility, whether it's an operational supply or a patient care supply. So patient care supplies are things like catheters, things that are used directly in patient care, maybe touching the patient, like a catheter touches patients in a very intimate way. And then there are operational supplies. So regardless of your involvement in patient care supplies, and there will be some, but it might not be to a great degree. If you're picking cases, you're directly involved in patient care supplying of those. Operational supplies, though, includes things like your indicators, your sterilization wraps, and even your rigid containers. Supplies don't necessarily have to be disposable items, but a lot of the supplies that we use are disposable items. So there are consumables and there are reusable. Patient care and operational things. These are also considered to be inventory. Even the bags of indicators are considered to be inventory. They're assets. They're owned by the facility. They have value. They can be counted as an asset toward the bottom line net value of the facility, of the organization. Other things that are considered to be assets are things like sterilizers. You know, it's worth money. It's something like a sterilizer is going to be called a capital equipment. They're huge, but like a bag of indicators, that's not capital. That's a small purchase. So capital items are things that have a high value above a certain threshold. It could be $10,000, depending on, you know, the way the business is run. Both of these supply categories, operational and patient care, are vital. They both affect the patient. Obviously, if you don't have a 16 French Foley catheter, that would be a patient care item, and that would affect the patient. But also, if you didn't have sterilization wrap, that would affect our ability to get things ready for the patient. Indicators and such. Okay, people who work with case cart technicians, it is my desire for you to become a case cart technician. They're really just people who are assigned to pick cases on that day. And I loved picking cases. It was my favorite thing. I got into a position where I could do it like every single day, and that's all I ever did. It was fun. It's like hyper shopping. You need to know how to find items, what to do if you don't have a certain item, where to go and look, who to notify, things of that nature. So we, as a case cart technician, would be picking supplies off of shelves that are patient care supplies because they're going to the operating room and they're going to be used in patient care. Okay, so we have operational supplies, patient care supplies, reusable, consumable. So a reusable, again, might be like a rigid container. We can reuse it until it is no longer able to be used. And then there's consumable, things like the wrap that is consumable. Use it once and then it's no longer a wrap. It is either trash or recycled. Both of these can be called inventory and both can be counted on as assets. Something like an ultrasonic or a new washer or an autoclave can be called inventory. It can be called reusable. It can be called an asset, but that higher dollar value, that higher amount, would make it a capital equipment. So when your manager tells you, I would love to order you a new fill in the blank, but that's capital budget and I've already maxed out this year. Well, then you know what that means. It means she can't just write the order and submit it and have the things delivered. It has to go up to the top. Okay. If you needed to see how trash works, there's a little chart at the bottom of page 393. It says you purchase it, you store it, you use it, you discard it. And there you go. That's how trash works. Okay, the key terms on page 394, inventory, reusable inventory, consumable inventory, capital equipment, and assets. And then where does inventory come from? Well, it is determined what is needed. It is purchased by a purchaser and it comes into the hospital. So most healthcare systems belong to what is called a purchasing group that enables it to purchase items at pre-negotiated discount pricing. And these group purchasing organizations, or GPOs, represent many healthcare facilities. GPOs are able to negotiate contracts for products and services that enable facility members of the GPO to receive special reduced pricing. So this might explain why when you ask for, when you ask your boss, hey, why don't we use this other company's instruments? It just seems so much better. Well, you probably have an agreement to purchase from a certain company at a greatly reduced cost. And so therefore you don't get to just purchase whatever you feel like. Okay, handling commercially sterilized items. So we sterilize items. We're not commercial sterilization. We sterilize instruments, instrument sets, and things like that. Sometimes we might sterilize single-use gauze pads or other things. But a lot of the things that we deal with are actually purchased already sterile from outside companies. And when commercially sterilized items are brought into a healthcare facility, care must be taken to ensure that those items are not compromised during storage, handling, and distribution. It's very important that these things remain sterile up until the point of use. So that's a big topic of chapter 16, keeping things sterile. We're going to skip over flow of materials for right now because that's just silly. And land on page 396. Look at these symbols. You have symbol like ref. This is a reference number. When are you going to use that? If you need to purchase something and you need to go into like the Lawson system, which is how many hospitals will use that system to input what they request. You'll need a reference number. Reference number could be whatever, ABC123. Serial numbers are unique identifiers that may exist on things that have a very high dollar value. So things like cameras and scopes, they'll have a serial number. Don't worry too much about serial numbers right now. Use by date though, definitely know what that means. That little hourglass symbol, it's a clock running out of time. It means that this thing is only going to be usable up into a certain time period. So if it has use by date symbol and 2009, 01 that would expire at the end of January 2009. And do not reuse. I love this symbol because it can cause comedy to happen. I had a guy who decided to clean something that came into the decontamination room that looked very similar to other things, and he thought, well, I don't know how to clean it, so I'm just going to hand wash it and put it in the pass-through window. I went over and picked it up, and I said, I've never seen this before, and I looked at it, and it had the do not reuse symbol on it. So I called him over, and I said, you know, you just washed garbage, right? So you want to pay attention to things like that, because it's actually not legal for us to re-sterilize, do not reuse items unless we have the certain permission from the Food and Drug Administration. Okay, lot numbers are important. If you are, if there's a batch of something recalled, you're going to need to know the lot number of that item as you go looking for the items. Date of manufacturer could also be involved in a recall. So lot number that was manufactured on this day would, you know, be information that you want to know. Don't worry about the CE. That is something that applies in Europe. But attention, see instructions. So many times the instructions are for the user. And it's going to tell them, you know, give them precautions on how to use it to keep the patient safe or whatever. But often then they are for us, the people dispensing it or storing it. So when you see attention, see instructions, then you see instructions. Okay. Expiration date format and placement is not the same on all packages. Sometimes you feel like you're reading hieroglyphics. Sometimes it is like embossed onto a piece of foil, like in that picture. Other times it's a lot more clear. We need to understand how to read these and interpret, because we will be responsible for storage and distribution of some items. So it is on us to make sure that we're using them in the correct order, and to make sure that we're not dispensing items that are already expired, to make sure that we're dispensing items first that are first to expire. So this, we think of, we need to make sure that we're thinking of this not as an expiration on sterility, but on an expiration on something that's inside of the pack. Some things, let's just say that you have sterile rubber bands. They exist. They can be purchased, but we're not going to sterilize rubber bands because we don't have an IFU. Don't sterilize rubber bands. If you, you know what happens to rubber after time. It'll start cracking and breaking, and eventually it'll turn into dust. So there has to be an expiration date on things where the material is not going to last forever. Sometimes an expiration date on an item could simply be that the packaging has only been tested so far out, and then after that we can't rely on the packaging. So regardless of whether an item uses what is called event-related sterility or event-related shelf life, or if it is a date-related shelf life, then it must be inspected before being dispensed. So the event-related shelf life means that it is okay to consider it safe to use until an event changes that. An event like dropping it on the floor. So when you're handling inventory, you know, make sure you're not doing things like sticking it up under your sweaty armpit or carrying a bunch of supplies like this in your arms, putting a lot of pressure on the packs. Don't drop it on the floor. If it drops on the floor, it is no longer usable. So be careful that you're not dropping things on the floor. You're going to be costing your hospital money. Okay, item locator systems. Item locator system can be computerized, or it could be paper. It could be a book where things are written down. And gosh, you know what? I'd much rather just type into a computer, like start typing the name of an item, and it's going to pop up with a list of items that have similar letters in their name, and then it's going to tell me where the one I'm looking for is supposed to be stored. Okay, but key here to remember is it doesn't matter whether you're using a computer or some kind of manual system, if you're not keeping track of where your things are, or if you have a poorly organized storage, this can lead to loss or even damage, which can impact a facility's budget. And we want to save the hospital money. That's kind of necessary. It's very necessary. It's not our money. We need to, part of our job is to make sure that we're doing right by